4 games, 4 different relationships with power, one argument running through all of them. Let's close it out. Here's what the series set out to prove, stated as directly as I can. Entertainment games built around political worlds are already functioning as informal civic learning environments, not because developers sat down and said, let's teach democracy, because good world building and good systems design produces political meaning whether you intend them to or not. The civic learning is a byproduct of the craft. Tropico never set out to teach anyone about soft authoritarianism, but put a player in charge of managing factions, propaganda infrastructure, and elections in the same interface, legitimate and corrupt options in the same menu, and you have modeled something real about democratic backfighting actually work. The game is making an argument, it just doesn't know it. Suzerain is a lot more intentional. It knows it's a political game. But even here, the civic learning doesn't come from the subject matter, it comes from the emotional weight of consequence. From being the person in the room when the rationalization happens, that's not instruction, that's just enactment. And enactment produces a different kind of understanding than anything you can get from a textbook. There's also Just Cause 3. It never tried to say anything political directly, and it said something political anyway. Coercive infrastructure as the visible texture of authoritarian control, propaganda as a physical system you can dismantle, liberation that costs the liberated something and then moves on without asking what comes next. The game is an argument that it didn't know it was making. And Lawgivers 2 is the quietest proof of all, because it shows you the institution working slowly, imperfectly, full of compromise and friction, and people who don't agree. And it makes you feel, maybe for the first time, why that friction is the point, why the slowness is a feature, why democratic process, as unglamorous as it is the achievement. I want to take a second to land the academic side of this because it matters for what I'm about to ask you to do. The research on civic learning in games has been pointing in one direction for a while now. Ferguson and Garza showed that even games with zero political content, Call of Duty, Counter-Strike, Fortnite, produces measurable growth in civic understanding just through the teamwork involved. Themistocleus and Avermedidu showed the civic outcomes depend on engagement content, not whether a game was designed for civic ed. And more recently, Deshaun and Kafafi made the argument explicitly. The serious gaming paradigm, the idea that only purpose-built education games can produce civic learning, is wrong. Commercial entertainment games generate civic connections when they embed players in systemic consequence. When the decisions feel real, when the outcomes take time to surface, when you're performing the logic of governance rather than just reading about it. Every game in this series did that. None of them were designed to. That's the thesis. And if it's true, and I think it is, then it has implications for everyone who builds worlds for a living. So here's who I'm talking to directly for this last one. If you're a game developer, you're already teaching people things about power. The faction system you design, the way your economy works, the moral trade-offs you build into your quest structure, those systems are quietly making arguments. Whether you intended them to or not, the question is whether you understand what arguments they're making and whether you can make them more intentional. That doesn't mean making a civic. It means understanding the political logic embedded in your design choices. It means asking, when you build a propaganda system or an election mechanic or an insurgency arc, what is this actually modeling? What does it teach a player about how power works? Is that what you want it to teach? The design patterns that do this work well are recoverable. Action systems that create genuine distributional conflict, propaganda mechanics that make information control visible and legible, election systems where the legitimate and corrupt paths exist on the same spectrum, policy consequences that take time to surface, institutional erosion modeled as incremental rationalization rather than sudden collapse, liberation arcs that ask what comes after. Those aren't complicated, they're intentional, and the games in this series prove that they actually do work. So if you're a writer or a world builder, the same applies. The political system that feels most alive in fiction aren't the ones with most drama. They're the ones that with the most texture, factions that genuinely want incompatible things, leaders who believe in what they're doing even when they're wrong, institutions that constrain power in ways that are slow and frustrating, but necessary, and resistance that costs something. The texture is what separates a political backdrop from a political world. And now you've seen what it looks like in four games that built it, two of them intentionally, two of them potentially by accident. This series started with a question about civics class in a cartoon built on the steps of the Capitol and ends here with four games that taught more about power, legitimacy, and democratic governance than most of what I remember from my formal civic education. Not because they were designed to, because good craft produces meaning, because the systems we build say things we didn't always intend to say, and because players, when they're embedded in genuine consequence, they learn things they didn't understand that they were learning. All right, I'm Bryson. This was World Building for Democracy. It was just a capstone project that turned into something I genuinely care about, and I'm not totally sure I'm done with this kind of thing. If the intersection of game design, political systems, and world building is something you want to keep exploring, stick around. There might be more. Thanks for watching.